All right, thank you all for being here. It's great and sunny outside, so it's definitely very appreciative that you're all here in this room on a Saturday, but we have a great lineup for you all here, so I'm really looking forward to deep diving into this topic. Maybe before we kind of start, maybe Chris, you want to kind of kick us off with a little bit of intro about yourself?
Sure, thank you. And yeah, thank you for joining us today. My name is Chris Murrer. I'm head of legal at Wallet Connect, which is a feature that hopefully all of you use and love. Before that, I was a lawyer starting my career in the US, in New York and Washington, D.C., covering a lot of different topics, including asset planning for people that wanted to have their body frozen and their consciousness uploaded to cyberspace. So I kind of feel like that took me down the wormhole a little bit into new concepts. From there, I moved to Switzerland, worked a lot with banks that were being prosecuted criminally by the US government, and leveraged that in, I guess, lessons learned to help crypto companies grow through their entire life cycle, then move to a payments processing company to develop their digital asset legal system. And now I'm at Wallet Connect. Yeah.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Aliya Gupta. I lead business development at Sygnum Bank in Switzerland. Sygnum, if you haven't heard of it, is the world's first digital asset bank. We work with most of the crypto ecosystem outside of the US, of course. And prior to that, I was at a Layer 1 protocol working on different solution applications for blockchain.
Cool. I'm also Chris. I currently run a project called Giga, which is working on, it's a deepen project working on school connectivity and creating infrastructure in parts of the world that are disconnected. There's a big blockchain component in multiple parts of it. And before that, I helped set up the UN's cryptocurrency fund. It's the largest crypto-denominated fund in public sector. And prior to that, I set up a bunch of companies, which mostly failed, but some of them did okay.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you all for being here. I think, we're talking about corporate Web3 adoption. We'll maybe make it a little bit larger and talk a little bit about kind of the banking world, the governmental world, etc. So it's kind of larger organizations as a whole. Maybe we can start a little bit from that topic and kind of understand why today we believe that large organizations need Web3. Why are we even talking about this panel today? I don't know if maybe Aliya, you want to kind of kick us off here, ladies first. Kind of like, why is Web3 interesting for a bank such as yourselves?
Sure. So I think everyone's kind of heard that big phrase, right? Blockchain is a solution looking for a problem. And I think since kind of the big bull run of 2017, like I've seen a lot of different kind of pilot projects be implemented, people saying, oh yeah, now this has blockchain and this makes it better? Like, does it solve a problem or is it just built on blockchain? But I think as the industry has matured a bit, we really see the proper or really, really useful applications in the finance world. So DeFi itself, of course, has proven to be incredibly successful as an application for blockchain, but then also now starting to kind of bring that innovation and power towards the traditional financial institutions and seeing where crypto can actually bring a little bit more efficiency, bring a little bit more flexibility to the way we work in the finance world. But when we talk about Web3, I think maybe I'm going to be the controversial person on this panel, because in a lot of cases, we talk about Web3 where it's not very clear where it adds value. And kind of bringing the corporate world into Web3 adoption, I think it's really, really important for us to address that question of where are we adding value? What is the use case for this beyond looking at just innovation? It's cool to do, makes us look, fresh and young, and so on. So that's my stance.
I agree. And actually, when we talk, we're in 40 countries now. When we talk to governments, we don't say Web3 or blockchain at all. It's totally irrelevant to the discussion we're having with them. We talk about technology that can help them make their lives easier, make them save money on things. When we set up the crypto-denominated fund in the United Nations, the blockchain part of it allowed us to do capital calls from investors and move money to investee companies in 15 minutes rather than whatever it takes in the real world, like, I don't know, days, months bothering your LPs. So there's clearly a time issue there. Now when we're looking at paying for infrastructure, and watching a school come online or a hospital come online, and you can see that thing turn on and turn green, the light turns green in it, you can do that payment automatically with a smart contract. But if you start telling a government like, hey, let me educate you on smart contracts, you've lost the whole conversation. What you want to do is say the thing that took your ministry 40 days to finalize an invoice on, you can now do in seconds. And so I think that's really what I see as the big shift in this cycle, that we can get out of the fetishization of blockchain and crypto and blah, blah, Web3, and get into practicalities, which is the only way the industry is going to really grow.
And maybe just on that point, Chris, furthermore, we've spoken a lot over the past, let's say, eight years about education is one of the most important parts about blockchain. Here, are you trying to mention that going down the route of educating some of those states and the likes about smart contracts, etc., is maybe the wrong rabbit hole to go around, and it's best to just kind of keep it higher level and maybe educate them later down the line when the solution is more apparent? Or what do you think?
How many clients do you go talk to and say, let me tell you what TCP/IP does? Or how you want to know how DNS works? It's super cool. Nobody ever does that. You're like, here's a website, here's an app. So I think we all love it. We're all in it. It's cool. The technology is one of the things that excites me. But wow, when you talk about that to somebody who's not in the field, it just makes you sound super weird, super scary, super risky. This is new stuff. And if you're a government or you're a big corporation or you're a public sector, new stuff is bad. And that's what we don't understand, right? Everybody who's building, we love new stuff. But for them, new stuff that people haven't tested is the most toxic thing in the world. And it's exactly the opposite of how we think, I think.
Fantastic. Would you like to add something there?
Yeah, I completely agree with all the panelists' thoughts on this. There's this idea sometimes you feel like innovation is just it's a theater or an exercise that some organizations go into, and it doesn't have that stickiness that will persist. And so a lot of what we do is exactly what they're speaking about is you have to come with, this is a way to make more money, or this is a way to decrease your costs. And use terms that will kind of resonate with them that don't use these kind of idiosyncratic terms that really, like you were saying, kind of make their hair stand up because it sounds like something that they've heard on the news, which is scary. And really what you're trying to do is help them solve a problem or make them more money.
Fantastic. And Chris, maybe to follow on from that, as a role at Wallet Connect, a lot of the audience probably know Wallet Connect from a retail standpoint. And here we're talking about kind of the corporate larger organization side. One of the key problems we've seen about adoption of blockchain technology is the UI UX side. I feel like a lot of the retail individuals here in the audience kind of they understand Wallet Connect, they're able to kind of connect their wallets now kind of to DApps and the likes. Do you feel like UI UX is one of the problems here? Kind of how are you facing that with corporates? Is it similar to the way in which you're doing it with retail or not? Yeah.
No, it's an excellent point, and I think internally in Wallet Connect we speak about this, and then externally we're very honest too. We think the UX is a huge problem in the industry. It prevents a lot of people from joining, and I think it also limits how much adoption can happen within the industry. What we tend to say is Web 2 is the standard in that respect. A lot of things that we do every day feel so easy, and there could be problems or things that we disagree with how they're done, but they're really easy and we're used to them. And so that's kind of the standard that we hold the UX for and the UI for all of the things that we build, and that it's something that we try to instill in all of our partners. This is the end goal that we have to go to.
Fantastic. I hope nobody kind of tried to cover their ears when you said Web 2 is the standard. Maybe Aliya, Chris, I don't know if you have any further thoughts on kind of the UI UX side of corporate adoption.
Yeah, I mean, making blockchain easy to use has kind of been the key problem of the industry, right? Of course, we talk about speed and scalability, security. These are all the key topics that the developers think about. But on the business side, it's really how do we make it usable? And one of the things that we're doing at the bank, of course, is kind of creating a very Web 2 interface to engagement with the technology. And that sounds incredibly boring, and that's a good thing. Because we're really trying to make the inside of your banking user interface really look exactly like it would if it was UBS or wherever you bank today. But inside that you see, I can also buy Bitcoin, I can also trade, buy, sell my tokens, and I can also stake my assets. But doing all of this inside a really Web 2 interface. And that, I think, is one of the ways to kind of open up people to exposure, bringing people into the space.
Couldn't agree more. So if you take a look, take your phone out and just go to, or your phone's already out, but go to www.projectconnect.world. You'll see one of the UIs for our project. So projectconnect.world. It shows all the schools that we've mapped. We've mapped 2.1 million schools around the world. Open up the map, go to Brazil. So just click on Brazil, and you'll see a bunch of dots. You'll see like 100,000 dots. Green dots are schools that are online right now. The red dots are schools that aren't online. It's projectconnect.world, right? That UI represents 3 layers of blockchain. Like, if the school is green, that's reporting, like, all the data is on-chain. The school is also an on-chain data object itself that is updated live, and the reporting happens, and through a smart contract, providers are being paid. But nobody in the government will ever see that. You don't see that. You go to that website, we don't talk about any blockchain stuff. You just see a bunch of dots. If you're the government, you draw a circle around a bunch of schools, and you see how much money you need to pay them to be connected, right? Or pay the ISP, the service provider. You never see anything about a smart contract. You don't have to connect your wallet. All of that stuff is in the background. All you see is something just like the banking website. Like, nobody's ever had a website like this for seeing their public infrastructure, but it still feels familiar. It's like a map. It's kind of like Google Maps. You can navigate it. And I think we need to do that for all of our stuff, because the world that we live in as kind of crypto native, blockchain native people is so complicated for somebody who's not like insane, basically.
Thank you for that point. I mean, I'm just reflecting on what all 3 of you have said, right? So for me, it seems a bit like same but different, right? It's kind of, we want to make it look a little bit like Web 2, but it's different because it's Web 3 in the back end. I mean, maybe we can just talk about, like, why should the corporate Web 3 world care, well, not the corporate world, not the Web 3 world, the corporate world care about that it's Web 3 on the back end of things, if things still look like the Web 2 side of things? I mean, maybe, I don't know who maybe was.
One problem we were working on at one of my last companies was we had customers that were crypto companies. They had trouble maintaining bank accounts. And so our job was to send them money, but we couldn't send them money because their bank account was in jeopardy. And if any of you work for a crypto company, this is a pretty common problem that I'm sure you have tough experience with. Fortunately, we have good players in the industry helping with that. But Web3 helped solve that problem because we could send them value in a different way that they chose, and we could do that 24/7 outside of the banking system. So we could talk about how that was based on blockchain, it was Web3, use all the vernacular, but really was, you need value, we can get it to you, we can solve your problem. And the great thing about, from my company's perspective, is that we could charge an additional fee for that service, because it was solving a problem for our customer, it was something they wanted, and it generated more revenue for us without any complaints. And so, like, that was really what you had to boil it down to when you had to talk to leadership at the company I worked for. Solving problems for our customer, we're gonna make more money. In the background, there's gonna be some things that, you know, really smart people are working on, but that's why it feels like Web 2 when you talk about it like that, because it's things they're used to, but it's the technology that makes it possible.
I can give you 2 sides of the coin here. So a situation where Web3 actually brought some ease and efficiency to a system, and also where it did, and it didn't make a difference and no one wanted it at all. So on the good side, we've got at Sygnum Bank, for example, you might have seen the headlines a couple of weeks ago where we tokenized a new class of shares with a really big global asset provider called Hamilton Lane. I don't know if you guys have heard of them. They're huge. They have almost $1 trillion in assets. And typically, if you want to participate in any of their funds, you need to have 125K as your initial buy-in. With the tokenization of their product, suddenly the threshold to buy in became $1,000. And that is just crazy. That is like, someone like me can participate in a fund like that. And that is literally a use case that changes the way we engage with finance, in access to finance. And so there's an example of where Web3 adoption made perfect sense for a really corporate use case, right? I can give you an example of where it didn't make sense as well. I used to work for a Layer 1 protocol, and we were looking for problems that we could solve with our great technology. And we went into timber tracing, how to move timber from Malaysia to Europe and make sure that this timber actually is where it comes from, is sustainably sourced, isn't part of, I don't know, any kind of illegal logging setups, things like this. And out in the field, the guys who were actually logging all of this timber were doing it manually. There was a little receipt, and the receipts were sent to the office, and then there was a guy at the office who would look at the receipt and put it onto the blockchain. And then we suddenly had, yeah, now we have this timber on blockchain to trace how it's moving from Asia to Europe. It didn't really solve a problem. There was still manual intervention. There wasn't really any way to verify the data that was going into it. And it was cool because these guys, could walk around and say, yeah, our supply chain's on Web3. But, I mean, there's a reason that it's not a global standard today because there's just so many holes in the process. And Web3 wasn't the solution for that specific problem.
Yeah, I think that the flip side of the problem is what regulators or what big corporate risk managers are worried about. And so is there also a way to solve against that? So when we set up this crypto-denominated fund in the United Nations, $40 million of crypto, mostly ETH, a little bit of BTC, it took us 3 years to get the asset classification done for that. Like, it just takes a while, right, to get the lawyers and the comptroller and the finance people to say this is okay. And we had very senior people say things like, if you ever classify crypto as an asset in the UN, you will destabilize the world financial system. And I was like, awesome. Show me where that button is. Like, we don't have to go through it, I'll press it now. The way that those folks aren't on Web 2. They're like, that finance type of person is on Web 0. I mean, when they think about things, they're not dealing with a Web 2 interface on their day-to-day. They're dealing with ledgers that are like generations older than that in their hearts, in their heads. Like, that's how they think about things. So if you can talk about risk, it really helps in the case of working with governments and public sector. If you can say this actually reduces your risk exposure, you can see stuff more clearly. Once you do the KYC and the AML stuff, then when you have this asset and you're moving it around, you actually can trace it. Your accounting is going to be better. Your audits are going to be cleaner. And so I think we also came at it from that way of going through to the Web 0 route, looking at what actually people were afraid of and seeing if there were ways that this technology could address that. But it meant not talking about any of the cool stuff. It just meant talking about the boring stuff and doing that over and over. And when we said we're going to be moving money through smart contracts, through the UN, we had a year of legal telling us, and we got stuck, and we had no idea why. Like, why is legal stopping us? Because they thought that a smart contract is a legal contract. Like, people got really upset with us that we proposed a new type of contract in the legal world. And we're like, well, no, it's just, but even that language is offensive. I mean, even those words are they set people off. So for us, it was all about going, to the very most bottom layer and rewording Web3 to be something that was about the functionality and de-risking. And that's what actually got things moving.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about that as well? I mean, as a lawyer, kind of the regulatory, kind of legal hurdles that you've seen and kind of the corporate adoption of Web3 a little bit?
Yes, yeah, smart guy. So a lot of it is the lawyers by their nature work on precedent. So the idea is like you're basing decisions, analysis, and recommendations on things that have existed and a history of how past situations have been applied to the law or regulations you're dealing with. And what we're dealing with every day are brand new things that are really hard to analogize to things that have existed before. And so this is the hard thing. I think you're bringing up something though that I try to instill in people that I speak to is we have to be really thoughtful about the terms we use. So smart contract may be something we really love, but if this particular term caused trouble for someone you were working with a stakeholder. So before we come up with a new term, really think about what are the potential implications of this new term we're using. And so a lot of that is you're dealing with people who are used to looking backwards for answers, and they get stuck on these terms. And so this is something that I really implore everyone in the industry is to think about the terms. Think I know this makes sense to you. Is this something that you think will work when we're kind of outward facing to other stakeholders in the industry? You have anything else to add?
Yeah.
It's just we come up with nerdy, funny things, and then they scare people over and over again. And when and governments also work on precedent and retrospective. And so a new thing, which to us is cool, because it's like, ooh, DeFi, that sounds fun. They're just most allergic to that. So yeah, I mean, figuring out, doing a translation backwards into the organizational world is key for us.
Yeah, see, I mean, and Aliya, I mean, you're working at one of the first regulated crypto banks, right? And when people hear bank, they're like, oh, wow, it's like super safe, etc. Have you felt the same type of kind of like constraints kind of from the regulatory side, you having a word that is very kind of traditional with a word that is a bit more kind of fearful, as both Chris's have just mentioned?
That's a hard question, because I think in Switzerland specifically, we're quite blessed with regulators that are willing to engage. And that is not the case globally, of course, but here with FINMA, you actually go to them and have a conversation. And when there's a term like, smart contracts that may not be super familiar, you can actually take them on that educational journey of how this technology actually makes what they want to do easier. So when you talk about like regulating, like crypto AML is a big topic at the bank, of course, right? And if you can really show how on-chain you have so much more transparency than typical Swift banking, it's something that regulators should celebrate. And today in 2024, it's crazy to me that we aren't further along on that journey somehow. Like the Swiss regulators, they understand it, and they're willing to kind of say, yes, okay, we have a new set of rules that can apply to this sort of transaction on chain, and that's how we can value these assets and make sure that we're not engaging with criminal activity and so on. But the fact that Switzerland's kind of still amongst the early players, I mean, now we have Mika, we have Vara, and so on in Dubai, but globally, I think that convergence of legality around the interaction with crypto assets. I mean, Chris, you can talk to this more probably, but yeah, getting there it should have been sooner.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. I guess there's an example, maybe hopefully breathe more life into this concept. So swaps is something we use a lot in the industry. I'm not going to convince anyone not to use it today, I'm sure. But swaps are a derivative financial product in the US, which is regulated as a security, and there's a such thing as a swap stealer that's supposed to get a license. So like this is just, it was something where, and when that first came up, I was like, this is going to cause trouble just because we're using this term. And it seems so intuitive. It's like, I have one asset and I just want to swap it with another. Like that makes total sense. But there's this regulatory implication of that word for a lot of people. And then sure enough, the US SEC sued Coinbase for a feature that allowed their non-custodial wallet to connect to DEXs and swap assets. Now the great news is that the US court just kicked that case out, or that claim out completely. So like swaps is a little clear in the US on that basis, but this is something that just caused trouble, and perhaps we could have avoided if we used a different word.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I mean, so we've spoken about kind of how over-education can kill education. We've spoken about the UI and UX implications, giving a familiar interface that people know. We've spoken about kind of words that might be triggers to people or not. Are there any other kind of tips and tricks here that you want to share with the audience around how we can enable larger organizations to adopt Web3? I mean, this is to anyone on the panel here. Is there anything that we're missing from that kind of set there?
So one thing that has always come to me, regardless of like what type of technology you're adopting, is think about whose job in that organization may be in peril or reduced or jeopardized, or they at least may perceive that if you're adopting a new technology. So an example is just not in the Web3 space is I was working with a global bank that was going to move all of their data to a cloud. And so internally, all of the IT people that worked on data security, where data was housed, how it was managed, they immediately thought like this meant all of their jobs were in jeopardy because that data storage and management was going to be outsourced to another provider. And this was a huge hurdle internally. So like even if you had everything buttoned up with the terminology, you're going to save money, you're going to make money, et cetera, you're still like had a really core part of the organization that was concerned about their job, which meant that they were going to resist that transition. And so getting them on board and explaining how this isn't going to imperil your job, this is actually going to make a new opportunity for you, and this is going to make the organization better as a whole. These are just like really important parts in getting the entire organization on board and making sure the new project will be a success.
I mean, I think also looking at where the world is going is a really good way to figure out how to get people to use stuff. And I'm not a huge fan of central bank digital currencies. I don't like them particularly, but it's a trend that governments are for sure looking at. And when we work with governments, if we talk about CBDCs, I guarantee you in every government that in all the 40 countries that we work in, there's somebody in their central bank who's looking at that issue, if not, having a white paper or having a small sandbox site. When we talk about the crazier crypto stuff, it doesn't fall into that's outside of their comfort zone. When we can start to talk about the places where digital currency or digital assets start to help a government do their job well, we can then bring in some of the things that we like, that we care about, some of the things from the open world, and we can start to kind of point the ship in the direction that we think is correct, that is about openness, that is about interoperability. But we have to be following, I think there's a tide that goes back and forth in the technology world. And the more you kind of follow that tide, the more you can get your stuff forward. And when we were starting, we were pitching like, this is our product, this is something that we built. And that's like the wrong way to do it. When you can say this is actually much closer to what you're already doing and it's just an integrator for something. It's just the edge of it. But then you kind of get your stuff in there too. That's how you get big adoption, at least in the public sector and at these big institutions. Because they just, the things that we value, again, I think is like ego and excitement and newness and discovery are not of value to big institutions in general.
Yeah, I mean, also in terms of corporate adoption, right? I was thinking about this question as the others are speaking as well. So Signum, last year we partnered with, I don't know if you guys have heard of Enzyme Finance. They're based here in Switzerland. They're really interesting company working on-chain asset management. And it's the kind of classic crypto DeFi use case. And then working with a traditional finance player like ourselves, it was a journey to kind of understand why we chose to work with these guys. What are the things that we prioritized as a corporation to work with this specific provider when, in fact, we know that there are several on-chain asset management solutions available. So for a crypto company that's building something that's cool, that can make something that can ideally make a traditional finance world easier or more efficient or more profitable, it's to kind of think about the enterprise-grade solution at the beginning. So making a solution that isn't, build fast, break things, but really taking into account all the enterprise-grade requirements in the creation of that solution. That was, I think, one important factor. The second was governance. So in crypto, you always hear about rug pulls. It's got the scary reputation of things that can go wrong really easily. How do we ensure safety of these assets when we engage with an on-chain asset manager? So where can the foundation change the rules? How can the foundation work with the vaults that we're creating? Where can Signum kind of have some kind of veto access on at least the assets that we're managing? These sorts of questions, they're really important. And you might not think about that perhaps when you're actually building your own solution. But for anyone to, especially from an institutional side, to trust putting their assets on that chain or in that vault, like bringing those kind of questions to the forefront, saying, hey, look, I know you're worried about this, and this is how we mitigate that risk. And that's something I think that really helps get the bigger corporations on board and willing to trust something new.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we have another approximately 15 minutes left, but we always kind of get cut short on the questions, so I wanted to go actually long on the questions. Does anybody have any questions in the audience? I think, Nicola, I don't know if we have a mic runner.
You can throw it from here.
Yeah.
Microphones? Thank you. Who is the one asking?
Is this for Chris, I guess? That Chris, sorry. I'm starting an e-commerce platform, and it's based on NFTs, so I'm touching the sun. I'm kind of a hybrid in between everything, but Wallet Connect is part of our connection. And then last week, these new AML laws come out, and I'm not sure how I'm going to handle that because I don't have to AML KYC the buyers on the site. I was going to do the sellers because it's an association. I'm creating a registered Swiss association. So I just kind of have questions on the AML side of things. Is there ever going to be a way for you guys to sort of handle that, or is there? Because right now I don't think anybody can utilize your Wallet Connect for anything goods, right? Anything you can't sell. Did you look at the law obviously last week, or did you see the new?
You're talking about the amendment to the EU AML regulation
last week.
Yeah, so I think hopefully the rumors have been dispelled a little bit. It didn't outlaw non-custodial wallets or self-custody wallets, and DeFi is not illegal based on this. There was a lot of, I think, sloppy reporting, unfortunately, on that. What's that? Yeah, so there's a limit. So if you're using, if there's a regulated crypto institution involved in a transfer, and and I forget the euro threshold, but that institution has to do some KYC on the self-custody wallet that's sending or receiving crypto. And so in your case, if one side of the transaction is a regulated institution, for a crypto institution, they may have to do some KYC on the self-custody wallet owner. And so this is a problem, for practically how you're going to implement that.
My site, people are sent from their wallet
Right.
to a smart contract outside of their platform.
Right.
So I have to now, if I just let the buyers come in and do that, then I don't know if that's going to be an issue. I have to kind of figure.
No, exactly. So I think where I was going with that is I think we have to build solutions that don't touch what that regulation is dealing with. So if you're not one of the regulated institutions in the flow, or you don't involve one at all, that regulation may not even be implicated. And so the idea is we have kind of the DeFi system in the way that we envisioned is that regulated institutions are not involved. We just have people doing peer-to-peer transactions, and we're making the right connections between them. That AML regulation may not be implicated.
Yeah. Take it over. Fantastic. I think there was another question somewhere. Yeah, right behind you.
Hello, guys. Thanks for the panel. So, this is kind of a provocative question. We can debate here for hours, but of course, this is a simple question that I would like to hear opinion from you guys. Is one of the core values, in my opinion, of Web3 is to bring back sovereignty, to individuals. They have a control of assets, online transactions, data in general. So, I would like to hear from you. How do you feel that corporate adopting Web3 tech can maintain the value of sovereignty, in society? Thank you.
It's a very good question.
I mean, it's like waves in the ocean, right? So you're sitting on the beach, and all of this new technology, when social came out as a big thing, Web 2 came out, you could see that was a wave, and the wave comes up on the beach, it goes up to the high water mark, and it pulls back. And some of that sand gets wet, and the sun comes out and it dries it, and by the end there's a little bit of wet sand, and then another wave comes up, and it's just like that. And I mean, this is the same thing. There's no, nobody's going to have full self-sovereignty and the utopian view. That's just not going to happen. Just like not everybody's going to have the social freedom that was promised with Facebook version whatever 0.001. Not going to happen. But what we can do is we can watch that waterline move up a little bit, I think. And I think we can push forward some of the things we care about. That's my opinion on it. It's not an institutional opinion, but none of these technologies do everything they promise. But if we're smart and if we can build open source frameworks within them that protect individuality, you get the waves, you get the waterline a little higher, I think.
That's a really, really nice answer and much more positive than what I was going to say. I was going to say, how do we protect Web3 sovereignty with corporate adoption? And the answer is you can't, because I work in a bank. KYC is like our bread and butter. There's not a single transaction that can come even in our distant horizon that we can't know whose funds they are and how they got those funds and how they're coming in contact with our anywhere in our infrastructure. It's like that's just the line in the sand that we can't cross. But what happens in DeFi, and as I think Chris said, that's a really positive spin on it.
I'll comment. So I think KYC is it's like the monster everybody's aiming at right now. I don't think KYC is that bad. Sorry. If social was KYC'd, if you actually had to have a real account, the internet would be a much less terrible place for many, many reasons. It would be much safer. What's interesting to me, when I talk about building these things that push that water line up a little more, I was just talking to one of the people who works in our team in Kyrgyzstan, and he told me he was out in pretty much far away from Bishkek, out in the farm areas, and that farmers in Kyrgyzstan are getting remittances in Bitcoin. And that's really weird. Like, just think about that. That they're not going through a stable, they don't have like a different wallet, they're getting Bitcoin, they're getting raw Bitcoin, and that's what their remittance is. And that wasn't, that set the hairs on the back of my neck up, because this is not somebody trying to pump anything. So something changes in the world. Something changes a little bit, and it changes a little bit in a lot of places, and that's really interesting. But like, I think the KYC thing is done. Like, you're moving crypto around, you're gonna have to be a real person. Otherwise, you're gonna be in an outside Wild West area.
Yeah.
I cannot improve upon those questions, or those answers. So.
They were greatly said. I think there was a lady right at the top.
Thank you. One note first, I hope nobody minds it terribly. It might be terribly cheeky of me. I usually call KYC in blockchain the equivalent of the Red Flags Act of 1863, I think, where you had to, an engine can go very fast, but you have to have someone with a red flag in front of it shooing cows off the road because there's no infrastructure. So this aside, this brings me to my actual question with the panel's indulgence. When it comes to corporate adoption, if you don't mind, and if you wouldn't mind sharing, what was your experience in reaching or navigating the ecosystem towards decision makers? And I'm sure you must have come across quite a lot of knowledgeable and very well-meaning and completely useless people along the way. How do you navigate that best, and how do you actually reach the decision makers? I appreciate that the question comes to someone who comes from a bank that adopts it already, and and they probably opened it because there was no decision-making through other means. But if the panel wouldn't mind
Yeah, so
sharing.
it's how do you reach the decision makers in large organizations to
Yes.
implement?
What's your experience in reaching them? Because I'm sure everyone has a different route forward. Thank you.
So I can start. For me, like, I tend to, when I have worked on Web3 projects with big corporates, really the message is, it was something I had mentioned before, is this will make you more money. Like, it really comes, like, the people at the top, that's what they care about, that if you want leadership to pay attention to you, this will make you more money, and this is how you do it. Another way to put that, if that's like too blunt, is this solves a problem for our customers, which they will interpret in their head as this makes us more money. Another way to put that is this is a faster way to revenue. So the sooner you get revenue faster, that's better for them, but it also, in a way, makes you more money. So it all comes back to this idea. So if you can figure out the best way to convey that message, I think a lot of messaging about, like, this will reduce costs, which then increases profit just from the bottom. I think that's also a great message. It's just, the proof is harder. I think it's really hard because there's so much cost up front. Like, how do you measure that? And a lot of the cost-saving measures have not always come to fruition.
Yeah, completely. It is, where's the bottom line? Where's it going to hit my bottom line? And even if you're talking about efficiency, the answer is really like, are we cutting the number of compliance people and therefore more money? Or is it more people entering the door because we can process them faster, therefore more money? Like, what's the actual, like, where does the money lie? That's obviously the most important one. But in terms of navigating an organization, I think it's really important to kind of have both approaches. So to really have your, like, kind of the grassroots members of the team to be interested and to be engaged with, alongside having some kind of big daddy, old corporate guy who can talk at that level at the top, because both those conversations really matter. When it's the grassroots, it comes internally and upwards, and that's nice, but when it's reaching the top, there needs to be someone who's had that conversation over there for that resolution to actually pass through. And I think both players really, really need to be engaged with.
I think it's true. And one of the big mistakes I've made in my last 10 years of doing this stuff is that I tend to go for the top person, get their buy-in, and then kind of run with it and not involve that middle layer. And then they get always upset. That it's always they're worried about losing their job or whatever, you know, the thing is, which can be real fears. And I've tried to work on that because my inclination is you just go where the center of power is, and then you forget in these big organizations that it's kind of diffuse. But I think the last thing that maybe we didn't talk too much about is I think that the head of a big thing, the head of, you know, somebody who's leading something, either wants fame, fortune, or function. The ones who want function are great. Like, those are nerds. I love them. I'm a nerd. Great, build cool stuff. They're rare. Then you want either fame or fortune. Fortune, we covered, like there are a bunch of ways to get to that. But there are some people who are motivated by the story of this, by you're going to be doing something great, you're going to be doing something cool. Even if you're in government, you're going to be the one who actually sets precedent. And that might get you another job at a higher level or in another ministry. So I think that that's one to look out for as well, that I've seen, that we can use some of the narrative of crypto, of Web3, of blockchain, to kind of tweak the fame lever a little bit, which you might not be able to do in other techs as well, tech areas as well.
Wonderful, very well said. We have time for one last question. I dot right in the middle. Go for it.
Those are two very different things. My expectation is very, very bad. What I'd like is very utopic. I think I'd love to hear from everybody else too, but like I think that what we're going to get is a very, very hyper-controlled world in the financial side of things, where you have a panopticon that's really ugly and that keeps, you know, under the rubric of helping poor people do stuff, creates a lot more financial controls. And I think that that's, you know, already happening, and that's depressing to me. I think that DAOs are a fake thing for the most part. Sorry, for the most part, in the way that they're talked about, because in essence, they're about replicating governance structures that are already there and just solidifying them. I think that there are people who are doing DAOs really well, but that motion is often a lip service to something that I really believe in but doesn't get there. I think that open source saves us as much as anything can from the water pulling back all the way. And so I think that as much as we can stay out of corporate-controlled currencies, of government-controlled currencies, I think that's where we see the edges. But it's, I mean, the future looks really depressing for a lot of reasons. So my expectations, I don't want to end it on a low note. But I think that as much as you can build in different parts of the world that are not controlled by these interests as much right now, you create a slightly better future. And that's sort of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with this whole KYC narrative as well that I was talking about before is, I mean, I think at the core of it, assuming you're a good actor, you also don't want to be financing terrorism, and you also don't want to be associated with, I don't know, the trade of dark goods on the internet or whatever these rules kind of support against or prevent from happening to some extent. And so looking at this as perhaps, at Signum we work on a lot of kind of innovation stuff as well, like ideas of things to build, whether we might actually build them today, tomorrow, or yesterday. But one of the ideas is to kind of have a sort of bank-grade digital identity that can be verified across multiple institutions, that gives you access to pools, but then what it still does is gives you some sense of sovereignty. So you do have an external person validating you, but you have you still own your own identity. Like, it's just one of those ideas that's kind of out there. It hasn't gained a ton of traction yet, but those are kind of the small sparks of hope in the dystopia that Chris just talked about. And I think that those are the things that, as long as there are people like us in this room who believe in that vision, who believe that we can use Web3 for something positive and create this balanced solution that still protects against, you know, terrorism and financing, but still gives us some level of sovereignty, I think that's a vision that's worth working towards.
Yeah, I was sincerely trying to end on a high note, and unfortunately, I think I side more with your. Like, the reason I got into this space is because I felt like there was so much potential for people interacting peer-to-peer we weren't relying on banking systems that could decide based on the whims of a government or pressure from a regulator or a commercial relationship to stop servicing certain people. And the people that have that access eroded tend to be the ones who need it the most. More sovereignty, more control over your data. These are all the things that got me interested. The thing I do really worry a lot about is this panopticon concept, where governments just over time have been adding more and more reporting and supervisory regimes just in general. And then what we're adding now is a public blockchain to the system. And it really does make me concerned.
Well,
Yeah.
no, come on. I mean, look, Web3 was a people-first movement. I think corporates adopting Web3 are essentially buying from everyone in this room, you and I. So if you end up kind of wanting something and we end up kind of envisioning a different type of future at the end of the day, I believe that the governments and the corporates are servants to us in this room today. So you can make the difference for the future that you want. Maybe that's a little bit lighter.
And he brought it home for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.